What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones. And coming up on today's episode, Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala joins the show. We'll take a look at what experts are predicting for the Broncos' 12th overall pick in this year's draft. All that and more coming up. Joining me here inside the Broncos podcast studio for today's episode of Broncos Now is Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala. Eric, thanks for joining me. How's it going?
It's good, Sid. How are you?
Doing well. I feel like it's been a while since we've been in here.
Yeah, nice to get back at it. Draft is, 2 weeks away?
2 weeks away from the day.
Very exciting.
Very exciting. I'm excited too. Eric, I know we've talked a lot about mock drafts in the past couple of weeks, but now that we're getting a little bit closer, like you mentioned, just 2 weeks out, what are some of the experts saying now? Who are they predicting the Broncos to take?
Yeah, Sid, we saw a run there on J.J. McCarthy for a long time,
right.
And there's certainly still some people predicting that, but Bo Nix is far and away, from a quarterback perspective, kind of who people are projecting to the Broncos. He's a guy that they think he's going to fit well in Sean Payton's system, his ability to process, get the ball out quick. People like those things and see some traits there. There's been some comparisons to Drew Brees a little bit. I will say I saw something on Twitter the other day where one tweet was like, Bo Nix is the perfect prospect for Sean Payton. And then right underneath it, another expert said, I don't think Sean Payton's going to like Bo Nix at all. And so I thought that was Twitter in a nutshell.
For sure.
Just kind of
That's
indicative.
A draft in a nutshell.
Exactly, right. It's you don't know what anybody's thinking, but Bo Nix has certainly gotten a lot of play. I would say the interesting thing the last few days is that people are now starting to have the Broncos trade down to get Bo Nix. I saw one mock draft have him go as late as the third round.
Oh, wow.
And, I think if you can find a way to do that and get another great player at 12, whether that's trading back into the first round, Bruce Feldman of The Athletic had the Broncos taking a player at 12 and then trading back in for Bo Nix. Some other people have had them trade down, take Bo Nix in the low teens, early 20s. Again, I mentioned the one in the third round. That's great. I will say that I think the consensus, most people, not just about the Broncos, but if you like a quarterback and he's there, you take him, and you don't necessarily take that risk. So we'll have to see what the Broncos do. If they do really like Bo Nix, it would maybe be a bit surprising to see them let him go past number 12 and take that chance. But again, if it works out and you get two good players, two players you feel strongly about, it's obviously better than one. But that's part of what's going to make the first round so interesting is that, there's a possibility even if the Broncos take somebody at 12 that's not a quarterback, it's not out of play to take one later. And so I think if you're a fan, maybe that creates a little bit more anxiety for a couple of hours, but it also creates some excitement. I will say if it's not a quarterback there, we're still seeing Jared Verse being mentioned a lot, the edge rusher from Florida State, had a really good year. Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, a corner who has flown up draft boards, performed really well in Indianapolis from a smaller school, obviously, but Terrion Arnold from Alabama, he was kind of considered the number one corner, and it seems like Mitchell has passed him a little bit. I've seen him as high as 7 or 8 in the top 10 in some of these drafts, and I think a lot of people are excited about the possibility of if you paired Mitchell with Surtain, what that would look like. But I know that everybody, the quarterback is what drives things. I know people expect the Broncos to make a move at some point in the draft at quarterback. Yeah. So we'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah. Eric, to go back for a little bit, you mentioned J.J. McCarthy at the start. It's kind of crazy, just his stock, how much it's gone through the roof pretty much. And, I know at the beginning of the draft process, there was a lot of talks, a lot of mock drafts about the Broncos taking him, but where the Broncos sit at 12, it seems like that's out of the question now.
Yeah. I mean, again, who knows what's real and what's not, right? You're right. From a stock standpoint, it seems like it's really high. There's been talk about him going to Washington at number 2, going at number 3 to New England. Do the Vikings move up and get him?
Right.
You're right that those conversations have all been had. And then every year you see there's one or two players that the media just has them ranked much higher, or people think they're going to go much higher than they actually go. There's somebody that people think is going to go low and ends up being a first-round pick. So I think you're right. The perception right now is that J.J. McCarthy is going to be way up there. If you want to get him, you're going to have to go up to 3 or 4 potentially. But maybe that's a team putting that out there because they want maybe the Vikings want the Broncos to think, hey, if you want JJ McCarthy, you're going to have to go to 4, and then he falls to 8 or 9, and the Vikings move up a couple of spots and get him. And so it's hard to know what's real and what's not.
That's fair.
And Sean Payton mentioned JJ McCarthy by name at the owners' meetings, and there's some fun stuff to talk about with that in terms of, did he mention that because the Broncos are actually interested and that's a little bit of a slip, or does he mention that because he wants people to think the Broncos are interested?
Plan. Yeah.
Exactly. It's all a smokescreen this time of year.
Sure.
I go back, Sid, to when the Broncos drafted Pat Surtain in 2021.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about him at all. And George Payton made it very clear that they purposely didn't interview him. They never spoke to Pat Surtain. He wasn't here on one of the visits. They didn't meet with him at the combine. They didn't meet with him at at any of these other opportunities. And so
good point.
They did that because they didn't want anyone to know they were interested. And so that's where, at the combine, Michael Penix was like, oh, the Broncos were really hard on me. And that was a tough interview. And I've seen some media members tweet like, oh, the Broncos must not be interested in Michael Penix. Well, is that a smokescreen to get attention away from that? And so it's just, who really knows at this point? That's what makes it fun. And hopefully in 2 weeks we'll know the answer.
Yep, we definitely will. Eric, kind of going off of that, what do you think? What's your gut, feeling? What would you like to see?
Oh my gosh. Well, I just think, one, continue to build this thing the right way. And it seems like the Broncos have made great strides in that this year. They made some tough decisions, but I think between the 1-year deals that they've signed a bunch of guys to, the players that they've kept, maybe prioritizing some younger guys, ascending players, it does seem like they're building that foundation. And so I just want them to stay true to that vision. And if that's a quarterback at 12, if that's moving up to get a quarterback, that's great. If you feel like that guy is a long-term answer, I think you never want to take a quarterback just for the sake of taking one. If you don't, if you get to 12 and the 3 guys you like or however many they like are gone, don't take one just to take one. I think Sean Payton and George Payton, definitely know that and certainly wouldn't do that. But I think it's just about staying true to that vision of building the right way. And I think Greg Penner said it well, where we expect to have success this year, but it's also about building for long-term success. And so you've got to do whatever it takes to make sure that long-term success can be possible and that you can get back into being a playoff contender, being relevant. And maybe that means taking a quarterback again. Maybe it means trading up. Maybe it means staying put at 12 or trading back and getting a good player and then getting a quarterback later. Or maybe it means passing on a quarterback if you don't believe in one of these guys and, taking a great, is it Quinyon Mitchell? Is it Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia? Yeah. Is it an offensive tackle? Is it a defensive tackle and really shore up that defensive line even more than you already have? I mean, I think I know it's a little bit of a hedge, and I don't have I want to see him take this player. Right. I think it's more about you've got to just stay consistent with the vision and build it the right way, because I think where teams get in trouble is they start to build and they try to build, and then they get tempted by one player and they abandon the plan. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like that's the type of football people that Sean Payton and George Payton are. They've always been very deliberate, and certainly we saw that last year, I think, in terms of the way the foundation kind of started to be built. For sure. So I just want to see them stay true to whatever the plan is, whatever that might be, and it might not be the outcome that makes fans jump up and down immediately. If obviously fans want a quarterback. Yeah. They want whatever quarterback they like too, right? They don't want the quarterback they don't want. And so my attitude this year is one more of patience and let's just see how this player fits in, how kind of it works out over the next couple of years, because this to me is a draft about you've got to hit on some late round picks to get the depth back to where it needs to be. You've got to, can you potentially find a way to get a round 2 pick to get another top 100 player? That's what this is about. It's more about building blocks and foundational pieces more than it is you've got to have X player. And so we'll see what happens, but kind of just trust the vision at this point is my thought on it. Yeah.
It's all about the bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that answer.
Well, we'll see how it goes, and it might not be these draft grades are always funny, right? Because sometimes you get an A, you get an F, and it just doesn't always kind of pan out the way that those immediate draft grades are. And so
those don't necessarily matter. You know?
Right. And so, this is going to be more about how do guys fit in moving forward in the long-term success of this team.
For sure. Yeah, Eric, we've talked a lot about the first round pick, obviously, because that's where the hype is this year. The Broncos haven't had one in a few years, but you mentioned it. Maybe the Broncos move up into the second round. They only have one pick in day 2 of the draft in the third round. So what can Broncos fans really just expect on day 2, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we talk about trading up, trading back. George Payton historically, and again, some of this can change, but George Payton historically trades back a lot, likes to get those picks. We know he talks about that a lot. Sean Payton has a history of trading up. He's only traded back in the first round, or excuse me, he's only traded back twice ever. It's never happened in the first round. Both of those 2 times he traded back in New Orleans came his first 2 years in New Orleans. Okay. And so, again, maybe there's a parallel there of he was still building things, and so maybe it is possible this year. But I think generally, if you were looking to get back into day 2, you've now got a couple of extra a 5th round, 6th round pick, right, from the Jerry Jeudy trade. Maybe you take one of those, use your 3rd and go up a little bit higher. Maybe you can take a 5th and a 4th and go up, get another day 2 pick. I mean, we'll have to see how it pans out. We saw last year the Broncos were willing to give up a future 3rd round pick to go up and get Riley Moss. So clearly they are willing to use future capital to go get guys. I mean, I do think that it's important to potentially get another day 2 guy, just because those top 100 players, I feel like those are guys you can normally depend upon to become starters. Yeah. But you've also got to take advantage of the 4th through 6th round picks and make sure that at the very least those guys are contributors on your 2 deep and can find a way to give you meaningful snaps, because you've got to kind of build this thing back up. Certainly we know the salary cap implications of moving on from Russ, and that does mean that having contributors in the draft is going to be important. And we've seen teams have success when they have big dead cap hits, but it does require some guys kind of playing on those rookie deals. So kind of a little bit of both, Sid, I guess, to answer your question. Is yes, it would be great, I think, to maybe take one of those extra 5th round picks and move up into the 3rd round, or find a way to get into the 2nd round. But I also think there's something to, hey, can you bring in 5 or 6 guys that are going to compete to make this team and make this team better? Yeah,
definitely. Well, Eric, I know typically every year the Broncos hold a pre-draft press conference. So assuming that still happens within, the next 2 weeks before the draft, what are you really hoping to find out?
Yeah, well, it's funny, like across the league, whenever those pre-draft press conferences happen, the coaches and GMs are like, this is the most worthless press conference of the year, because we're not going to tell you anything. We're not going to
tell you anything.
You're going to ask us questions and we're going to lie to you. And then you'll write your stories and it'll be meaningless. And I do think the value from those comes, I think, after the fact. And, maybe you get a little inkling here or there, or something they say kind of makes you go, well, I wonder if that means that this is going to happen, or you think a little bit longer about a certain position, maybe. But I think it's more valuable after the fact, when you can go back and say, okay, they drafted, like last year the Broncos drafted Marvin Mims with their first pick. You go back to the pre-draft press conference and you listen to them talking about the types of players they wanted, or the attributes they look for, and you go, okay, in retrospect, like Marvin fits that really well. And so I think the benefit a lot of the times comes afterwards. But it's one final chance to see if you can get a little something, and maybe they offer something up. But for the most part, it's one last chance for them to deflect questions and get ready to roll when the draft gets here. Yeah,
well, I'm looking forward to the draft, Eric. Just 2 weeks away, like you mentioned. In extremely unrelated news, did you see that DeMarcus Ware was on The Masked Singer?
I did see that. He dressed up as a koala.
Interesting.
Yeah, we know he's a big singer. So he sang the national anthem at the Hall of Fame game.
Right. I didn't get to hear his song, though. Did you hear it?
Oh, it's on YouTube.
I have to go. You
can find it.
Yeah.
He has his band Mirage that he sang with, I think at Taste of the Broncos way back when. Right. So we know this is something near and dear. Yeah, to his heart, a passion of his, like you said. I thought he did a nice job. I mean, it was fun watching them try to guess who he was, because they get little hints, and there was a Colorado flag, and they mentioned he was one of the best of all time at what he did. And so they got on the football track, but
yeah.
they guessed Deion Sanders, they guessed Shannon Sharp.
Yeah.
I think Shannon would probably be really good at
I
that.
think Shannon would be good at that too.
Show, but it was DeMarcus. I do feel bad. He got voted off the first episode that he was on, so wish he would have made a longer run. It did seem like there was some controversy in the comments that maybe the starfish should have gone home instead of the koala. So I've never seen the show before. It seems a little bit out there.
It's a little interesting.
But good for DeMarcus.
Yeah, good to see him do that. Well, Eric, appreciate you joining the show.
You got it, Sid.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Broncos Now. Broncos Country, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube next week for another episode. I will see you all then.